Good morning, Southern California, AM 1220, KHTS. Host Fred Arnold on the Santa Clarita Valley Chamber of Commerce Business Spotlight. I'm joined by Selina Thomas Ross, and you were on my show last month.
Yes.
And 6 Degrees HR Consulting.
Exactly.
You know, every time I say that, I'm thinking about, I think it was the 30-degree bar in Vegas where you go and it's cold, and for some reason I'm thinking every time you come in, this is going to be fun, right?
Yes, it is.
So we're going to have fun with this.
We'll try to make HR fun.
Now, HR sometimes can be challenging.
Absolutely.
And it can be. So since we last were on the air, what are some things that businesses need to be concerned about right now?
Certainly the deadline for implementing the mandatory paid sick time off in your, not only your policies, but in your infrastructure. Posting it, knowing, informing the employees that it's available, how they can access it. July 1 is that deadline for it to be implemented. And the infractions and penalties, if that's not in place, are pretty stiff. So it's really important that we're getting that in our infrastructure.
So let's take a step back on that. Mandatory paid time off. What is the ruling on it? And I assume it's the California legislature that ruled on it.
And it came from, it really was designed for part-time employees, but it certainly affects everybody. But it came from assuring that families have that healthy time off. And so that being made available after January 1, but allowing employers 6 months to kind of build it into their budgets, build it into their infrastructure, and not only that, but educate and inform their employees how to access it. So it's important that everybody be permitted time off if they're sick. And so that's the premise.
People weren't permitted time off?
Well, they weren't paid for it. So that's the difference. So that's why that language is there.
So they put in so many days
to
implement that.
Correct, exactly.
Yeah. Now, that could be a huge burden of cost to business.
Absolutely.
And so how do we look at that in a positive sense?
In a positive sense, you still have a little bit of time to get some support and creative ideas of how to build it into your budget, maybe making some discretionary cost changes. Some of the things that you used to have in place now, they're not as available because you're having to build this into your budget. Being creative about having those expenditures that maybe you were giving as perks before, but you have to pull back a little bit.
Or, and this is one thing we do, is if you don't use it, and it's getting towards the end of that time, I encourage my employees to
use it,
to take a opportunity to get a physical so they're not actually sick. So that way people aren't using it for things other than what it's intended for, but they don't feel like they're losing a benefit because they're able to still teeth cleaning, teeth appointment, things like that at the end of the time. Are you finding employers encouraging people in a real positive way?
Well, certainly having those kind of healthy campaigns, those campaigns about getting your flu shots in that flu season, having those times off for your kids when they need to get their flu shots, because a lot of people are taking the time off to be home with their kids.
Yeah.
So
especially if they can plan it out when it's the end of the season, and without a doubt.
Be proactive, for sure.
Being very proactive. Tell us how you can help in this area.
Well, part of my job is to come in and to discuss where they're at. If they haven't built those things in their budget, find a way that they can. Certainly the logistics part of it. Those labor posters that you see every time you go into the lunchroom, those posters need to be put in place. I would go in and do a logistics review to make sure that they're there, but also review the handbooks to make sure that the language is there as well, that it's in their sick policy. Because those are the areas that anyone that is looking into it would go to first.
And I got to tell you, Selena, one thing that's really important is an ounce of prevention, really not a pound of loss, but many pounds of thousands of dollars. You know, if your deductible's $10,000 or $20,000 for your for liability for your company, that boom, you get it right away. Plus the time of going through all that.
And certainly having to hire someone to then battle the battle for you. It's just not one of those things that you want to have to do if you could have managed it when you were given all of those warning shots, if you will, to, post this, to have this, so on and so forth. So 6 Degrees can help in assessing that and putting that in place, for sure.
Can I rapid fire some questions you're not prepared for?
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Let's name 2 or 3 things that all businesses need to do, and I'll throw an easy one out. Employee manual.
Definitely employee manual. I can't emphasize this enough. Again, previously when we've spoken before, we talked a lot about how that gives the employee the guideline for the expectations of the company. So if you don't have those things set for them, they're, one, not able to reference anything if there's a moment where they're, you know, at a loss, and two, you can't defend anything later if something does come up because you really don't have anything that they could have drawn from. So if you don't have that for them, you're both at a loss, and so that doesn't make any sense if you're a company being proactive about things, why you wouldn't have it in place. And it's so easy to put it in place when you have these kinds of resources available.
What about the idea of taking one meeting a month and highlighting parts of the employee manual? Because then people could say, well, I was never given it. Well, every meeting, here's what we've done, and document it.
Absolutely. And I certainly think, too, the current issues of the day that are happening, some of the things that we talk about in meetings kind of reduce some of the issues maybe that are cultivating and brewing in the company. And so that's another way to kind of mitigate some of the issues that might turn out to be an issue later down the road.
Well, I think that'd work in relationships. I think that'd work for our country right now.
In general.
Everything
Let's talk to each other,
exactly.
Right?
Everything is going on in our country right now. Absolutely. Maybe that would be good. Posters.
Posters, those are mandatory. At the end of the day, a part of the concept for these entities to regulate you is that there's a visual tool. Not everybody is going to refer to the manual in the same way that you and I do. I mean, I'm a reference point person, but then there are other people that reference some things with a visual tool, and so that's why that poster is mandatory.
Last thing I'm going to throw in, because we're almost done, background checks.
Definitely the vetting is important. It really speaks to later down the road the attrition rates and why someone is having a high turnover rate, because they probably didn't do something in the beginning that could have highlighted something that would have been a warning sign for them about this person's pattern. So if you're vetting this information early, gathering it early, and can make a conclusion that this would be a good fit for you, you're going to be proactive about minimizing the attrition.
Perfect. Well, those who want to reach out to you and get your great advice.
Definitely. 6 Degrees HR Consulting and Selina, PHR@gmail.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming in. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good Selina Thomas Ross from 6 Degrees HR Consulting. Well, I hope you enjoyed this edition of the Santa Clarita Valley Chamber of Commerce Business Spotlight. This show is Fred Arnold on AM 1220 KHTS.